Picture this. It's 2027. You wake up to a news alert on your phone. Federal government announces historic debt restructuring program. You scroll through the details, half confused, half relieved. Your student loans? Gone. Your friend's mortgage? Reduced by 40%. Your uncle's small business loan? Forgiven entirely. The stock market opens, and it doesn't crash. It rallies. The dollar doesn't collapse. It stabilizes. And the entire world just keeps spinning. You think to yourself, wait, they can just do that? And the answer is yes. They can. They will. And they're already setting the stage. Right now. While you're watching this video. Welcome to the era of national debt forgiveness. Not as a conspiracy theory. Not as a fringe economic idea. But as a calculated, inevitable, political strategy. And if you think this sounds insane, stick with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how it works, why it's coming, and who's going to pay the price. This isn't about hope. It's about mechanism. 7 political levers. 7 tools that governments already possess. 7 paths converging into one outcome: mass debt erasure. And the wildest part? Most people won't even realize it's happening. But before we go further, let me ask you something. Do you really believe your government will keep paying interest on debts it can never repay? Or do you think, just maybe, they've already figured out a way to walk away from it all without calling it a default? Think about that. And while you do, hit that subscribe button. Because what I'm about to show you isn't being discussed on mainstream news. It's not in your economics textbook. And it's definitely not something they want you connecting the dots on. So do yourself a favor. Like this video. Drop a comment telling me which country you think will forgive debt first. And let's get into it. Because once you see these 7 levers, you can't unsee them. Let's start with the big one. Lever number 1. Central bank intervention. You've heard of the Federal Reserve, right? The European Central Bank. The Bank of Japan. These aren't just boring financial institutions. They're the silent architects of modern economic reality. And here's the thing most people don't understand. Central banks don't operate like your local bank. They don't need deposits. They don't need savings. They create money out of thin air. Literally. With a keystroke. A ledger entry. And boom, billions of dollars exist where nothing existed before. Now, what does that have to do with debt forgiveness? Everything. Because when a government owes money, the central bank can simply buy that debt. It's called quantitative easing. You've heard the term. But do you know what it actually means? It means the central bank buys government bonds, essentially IOUs from the Treasury, and holds them forever. And here's the kicker. If the central bank holds your debt, and the central bank is technically part of the government, who exactly are you paying back? Yourself. It's a shell game. A financial magic trick. The government borrows. The central bank buys the debt. And then, they just sit on it. No repayment necessary. No default declared. The debt still exists on paper. But in practice, it's gone. Monetized. Absorbed. Erased. Now you might say, but won't that cause inflation? Yes, maybe. But here's the secret. Inflation is a choice. Governments can control the narrative. They can call it transitory. They can blame supply chains. They can point to foreign actors. They can say it's the cost of growth. And by the time you realize your rent doubled, the debt's already been wiped clean. This isn't theory. Japan has been doing this for decades. Their debt-to-GDP ratio is over 260%. And yet, they're still here. Still functioning. Still one of the world's largest economies. How? Because the Bank of Japan owns most of the debt. And they're never asking for it back. The U.S. Federal Reserve? They're walking the same path. During COVID, the Fed's balance sheet exploded. They bought trillions in government debt. And guess what? They're not selling it. They're holding it. And when the next crisis hits, and it will, they'll buy even more. This is lever 1. Central bank intervention. Silent. Legal. Irreversible. Now let's talk about lever number 2. Electoral pressure. Here's a truth politicians know but rarely say out loud. Voters don't care about fiscal responsibility when they're drowning. They care about survival. And right now, millions of people are underwater. Student debt in the U.S. alone? Over $1.7 trillion. Credit card debt? Hitting record highs. Mortgages? Increasingly unaffordable. Medical debt? Destroying families. And here's the thing, this isn't just an American problem. It's global. Canada, UK, Australia, South Korea. Household debt is at historic levels almost everywhere. And politicians are feeling the heat. Let me give you an example. In 2020, U.S. politicians from both parties supported direct stimulus checks. Why? Because the alternative was riots, mass evictions, economic collapse. And when people are that desperate, they vote for whoever promises relief. Now imagine the next election cycle. Imagine a candidate who says, "I will forgive your student debt," or "I will restructure your mortgage," or "I will wipe medical debt clean." What do you think happens? Landslide. Because the majority of voters are debtors, not creditors. And when the majority holds the vote, the majority gets the policy. This is why debt forgiveness isn't radical anymore. It's strategic. It's a campaign platform. It's how you win. And once one country does it successfully, others will follow. Because no politician wants to be the one who didn't forgive debt while their rival did. Electoral pressure is real. It's mounting. And it's pushing governments toward mass forgiveness whether they admit it or not. Lever number 3. Legal restructuring tools. Here's something they don't teach you in school. Governments have legal mechanisms to restructure or erase debt without calling it a default. Let me explain. When a corporation goes bankrupt, it files for Chapter 11. It restructures. Creditors take a haircut, and life goes on. But what about a country? Can a country go bankrupt? Technically, no. But practically, yes. And there are legal frameworks already in place. Take sovereign debt restructuring. It's a process where a country negotiates with its creditors to reduce what it owes. Argentina has done it. Greece has done it. Ukraine is doing it right now. And every time it happens, creditors lose money. Bondholders get paid pennies on the dollar. And the country keeps functioning. Now here's the twist. Most people think this only happens to weak countries. But that's not true. The tools exist for everyone. The U.S. could restructure its debt tomorrow if it wanted to. It just hasn't needed to yet. But the legal infrastructure is there, waiting. And then there's another tool, Jubilee clauses. Ancient concept, modern application. Historically, debt jubilees were proclaimed by kings to prevent societal collapse. Every 50 years, all debts forgiven. Slate wiped clean. Sounds biblical, right? Because it is. But guess what? Modern economists are reviving the idea. Papers are being published. Think tanks are discussing it. Politicians are floating trial balloons. Why? Because when debt becomes unpayable, forgiveness becomes the only logical solution. You can't squeeze blood from a stone. And you can't collect payments from people who have nothing left. Legal restructuring isn't a fringe theory. It's a tool in the box. And it's about to be used. Lever number 4. Inflation as a hidden tax. Let's talk about inflation. Not the kind you hear about on the news. The kind that quietly eats your savings while governments smile and say everything's fine. Here's the trick. Inflation erodes debt. If you owe $100,000 today, and inflation runs at 10% per year for a decade, that debt becomes worthless. Not in nominal terms, But in real terms, your $100,000 in 10 years buys what $40,000 buys today. So you still owe the same number, but the weight of that number, gone. This is how governments have always dealt with debt. They don't forgive it. They inflate it away. And the beauty of this method? Nobody calls it forgiveness. It looks like economic growth. It looks like recovery. But behind the scenes, the debt is being vaporized. Now you might say, but inflation hurts everyone. True. But it hurts creditors more than debtors. If you owe money, inflation is your friend. If you're owed money, inflation is your enemy. And guess who the biggest debtor in the world is? Governments. They owe trillions. And guess who benefits most from inflation? Governments. They pay back loans with money that's worth less. It's the ultimate sleight of hand. And right now, inflation is creeping back into the system. Not by accident, by design. Because inflation is how you forgive debt without admitting it. You don't cancel the number. You just make the number meaningless. This is lever 4. And it's already in motion. Lever number 5. International creditor fragmentation. Here's a question. Who does the government actually owe? You might think, other countries. China, Japan, Europe. And sure, that's part of it. But the majority of U.S. debt? It's owned domestically. Pension funds, insurance companies, mutual funds, the Social Security Trust Fund, your retirement account. Now here's the thing. When creditors are fragmented, they're weak. They can't coordinate. They can't collectively demand repayment. They can't organize a default response. And governments know this. So when debt forgiveness comes, it won't be a single dramatic event. It'll be 1,000 small cuts. A pension fund takes a loss. A bondholder gets restructured terms. A foreign creditor gets paid in devalued currency. And because no single creditor has enough leverage to fight back, the forgiveness happens quietly. Fragmentation is a feature, not a bug. It's how you dismantle a debt mountain without a revolution. And internationally, the system is even more fragmented. China holds U.S. debt, but the U.S. holds leverage over China. Trade, military, technology. So if the U.S. decides to restructure, what's China going to do? Invade? No. They'll negotiate. They'll take a haircut. They'll move on. Because the alternative is worse. This is the power of fragmentation. When your creditors are scattered, divided, and individually weak, you can rewrite the rules. And no one can stop you. This is lever 5. And it's why international debt forgiveness is easier than you think. Lever number 6. Populist movements. Let's talk about anger. Because right now, people are furious. And I don't mean the kind of anger that fades after an election cycle. I mean deep, systemic, generational rage. At banks. At elites. At a system that bailed out Wall Street, but left Main Street to drown. And this anger? It's fuel. Political fuel. And politicians are starting to realize the fastest way to channel that rage is to give people a villain and a solution. The villain, the creditor class, the banks, the bondholders, the 1%. The solution, debt forgiveness. And once that narrative takes hold, it's unstoppable. Look at what's happening around the world. In the U.S., politicians are openly discussing student debt cancellation. In Europe, debt relief for southern countries is back on the table. In Latin America, leftist leaders are winning elections on platforms of debt resistance. This isn't fringe anymore. This is mainstream. Because populism thrives on one simple promise: we'll take from them and give to you. And when them is faceless institutions holding trillions in debt, and you is the exhausted middle class drowning in payments, the politics write themselves. Populist movements don't care about fiscal orthodoxy. They don't care about credit ratings. They care about votes. And votes come from debtors, not creditors. So when the next wave of populist leaders rises to power, and they'll bring debt forgiveness with them. Not as a radical idea, but as a campaign promise. And once it's a promise, it becomes policy. This is lever 6. And it's gaining momentum every single day. Lever number 7. Political incentives. Let's get brutally honest. Politicians don't serve the economy. They serve themselves, their careers, their legacies, their re-election campaigns. And here's the calculation they're making right now. What costs more? Servicing an impossible debt or forgiving it? Let's break that down. Servicing the debt means interest payments that consume a growing share of the budget, austerity measures that make you wildly unpopular, tax increases that trigger backlash, spending cuts that destroy public services, economic stagnation that guarantees you lose the next election. Now compare that to forgiveness. Yes, there's short-term market panic. Yes, creditors scream. Yes, there are consequences. But here's the thing, those consequences are diffuse. They're abstract. They're long-term. And voters don't punish politicians for abstract long-term consequences. They punish them for immediate, tangible pain, like losing their house, or defaulting on their credit card, or being crushed by student loans. So the political calculation is simple. Forgive the debt, win the election, and let future politicians deal with the fallout. And let me give you a historical example. After World War II, Britain was drowning in debt. Debt to GDP was over 250%. How did they deal with it? They didn't pay it back. They inflated it away. They restructured. They negotiated. And within a generation, the debt was manageable. Did creditors lose money? Yes. Did Britain collapse? No. Did politicians pay a price? Not really. Because by the time the consequences became clear, those politicians were out of office. This is the game. And modern politicians are playing it right now. They know debt forgiveness is coming. Because they know the alternative, actually paying back trillions, is political suicide. So they'll choose forgiveness. Quietly, gradually, inevitably. This is lever 7. And it's the most powerful one of all. Because it's not about economics. It's about power. And power always finds a way. Now, let's zoom out. Because here's what happens when all 7 levers pull at once. You get a perfect storm. A convergence. A moment where debt forgiveness goes from impossible to inevitable. And we're approaching that moment. Fast. Let me paint the picture. It's 202x. A major economy, let's say the US, faces a new crisis. Another pandemic. A financial crash. A war. A climate disaster. Doesn't matter which. What matters is, the economy seizes up. Unemployment spikes. Defaults cascade. And suddenly, millions of people can't pay their debts. Not because they're irresponsible, but because the system broke. And in that moment, the government has 2 choices. Option 1, do nothing. Let the defaults happen. Let the banks collapse. Let the economy spiral. Let the people revolt. Option 2, intervene. Forgive the debts. Restructure the system. Stabilize the economy. And claim credit as the savior. Which do you think they'll choose? Here's how it unfolds. Step 1. The Federal Reserve announces an emergency bond buying program. They buy trillions in government debt. The media calls it quantitative easing. But really, it's monetization. It's forgiveness. Just under a different name. Step 2. Congress passes a Debt Relief Act. Student loans? Forgiven. Medical debt? Erased. Small business loans? Restructured. They don't call it forgiveness. They call it economic stabilization. But the result is the same. Step 3. International creditors are quietly offered a deal. Take 60 cents on the dollar, or take nothing. Most of them take the deal, because 60 cents is better than zero. And just like that, trillions of dollars in debt vanish. Not through collapse, not through revolution, but through policy. Legal, calculated, inevitable. Now, who wins? Debtors. Obviously. If you owe money, forgiveness is a windfall. Your burden disappears. Your future opens up. You can spend again, invest again, live again. Governments win too, because they just bought loyalty from millions of voters. They stabilized the economy without raising taxes. And they get to claim they saved the country. So who loses? Creditors, bondholders, savers, retirees. Anyone holding government debt just watched their investment evaporate. Pension funds take massive losses. Insurance companies collapse. Foreign governments holding U.S. bonds? They get paid in devalued currency. And inflation erodes everyone's purchasing power. So yes, there's a cost. But here's the brutal truth. The cost is spread out, diffuse, invisible to most people, while the benefits, immediate, tangible, obvious. And that's why it works. Because the pain is hidden, while the relief is celebrated. Now let me ask you something. Do you think this is fair? Do you think the people who saved responsibly should pay for the people who didn't? Or do you think the system itself is broken, and forgiveness is the only way to fix it? There's no easy answer. But the reality is, fairness doesn't matter. Politics does. And politically, forgiveness wins. Every time. Let me give you a real-world example. Argentina. In 2001, Argentina defaulted on $100 billion in debt, the largest sovereign default in history at the time. Economists predicted catastrophe. They said Argentina would be shut out of global markets forever. They said the economy would collapse. And for a few years, it was rough. But then, Argentina recovered. They renegotiated their debt. They grew again. And today, they're still here. Still functioning. Still borrowing. Because here's the secret. The global financial system needs countries to borrow. If everyone paid off their debt, the system would collapse. So even after a default, after forgiveness, creditors come back. Because they have no choice. They need somewhere to park their money. And government bonds, even risky ones, are still the safest game in town. This is why forgiveness works. Because the system is designed to absorb it. Now let's talk about timing. When does this happen? Not today. Not tomorrow. But soon. Because the debt levels are unsustainable. U.S. national debt is over $34 trillion. Interest payments alone are approaching $1 trillion per year. That's more than the defense budget. More than education. More than infrastructure. At some point, the math just stops working. And when that happens, the only options are default or forgiveness. And since default destroys credibility, they'll choose forgiveness. Quietly, gradually, under different names. But it's coming. And the signs are already here. Look at what happened during COVID. Trillions in spending. Trillions in debt monetization. And the world kept spinning. No collapse. No hyperinflation. Just adjustment. That was a test run. A proof of concept. It showed governments that they can print, spend, and forgive without immediate catastrophe. And now, they know they can do it again. Bigger. Bolder. More permanent. The infrastructure is built. The precedent is set. All they need now is the right crisis. And crises, they're not hard to find. So what does this mean for you? If you're a debtor, you might catch a break. But don't count on it being total. Forgiveness will be selective, political, Certain debts will be forgiven. Others won't. Student loans? Probably. Medical debt? Maybe. Credit card debt? Less likely. Mortgage debt? Only in a severe crisis. The key is, governments will forgive what's politically useful. What wins votes? What stabilizes the system? Everything else? You're on your own. If you're a saver, you're in trouble. Because inflation is coming. And inflation destroys savings. Your cash loses value. Your bonds lose value. Your fixed income becomes worthless. This is the hidden cost of forgiveness. It's not announced. It's not debated. It just happens. And by the time you realize what's been taken from you, it's too late. If you're an investor, you need to adapt, because the old rules are dying. Bonds used to be safe. Not anymore. Cash used to hold value. Not anymore. The game is changing. And the winners will be the people who see it coming, who move their wealth into assets that survive forgiveness. Real estate, commodities, stocks in essential industries. Anything that holds real value, not just paper promises. Because paper promises? They're about to be broken. Now let's talk about the international angle. Because debt forgiveness isn't just a domestic issue. It's global. And when one major economy forgives debt, others follow. Why? Because they can't afford not to. If the US forgives, Europe has to forgive. If Europe forgives, Japan has to forgive. If Japan forgives, China faces pressure to forgive. It's a domino effect, a race to the bottom, or, depending on your perspective, a race to stability. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because international debt forgiveness isn't just about domestic relief. It's about geopolitics. It's about power. It's about who controls the global financial system. Right now, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency. That means most international trade happens in dollars. Most debt is denominated in dollars. Most central banks hold dollars. And that gives the US enormous power. But here's the thing, that power comes with responsibility. The US has to maintain confidence in the dollar. It has to prove the dollar is stable, reliable, worth holding. But what happens when the US starts forgiving trillions in debt? What happens when they monetize endlessly? What happens when inflation spirals? Confidence breaks. And when confidence breaks, countries start looking for alternatives. Enter the BRICS bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a growing list of others. They're building an alternative system. A system not based on the dollar. A system where debt forgiveness is negotiated differently. Where creditors have more power. Where the rules are rewritten. Now, I'm not saying the BRICS will overtake the dollar tomorrow. But I am saying the cracks are forming. And debt forgiveness in the West accelerates those cracks. Because if the US can forgive its debt, why can't everyone? And if everyone can forgive, why hold dollars at all? This is the paradox. Forgiveness solves the domestic problem, but it creates an international one. And the international one might be worse. So what's the end game? Honestly, nobody knows. But here's my best guess. We're entering an era of competitive debt forgiveness. Countries will race to relieve their populations. They'll use every lever available. Central banks will print. Politicians will promise relief. Legal systems will restructure. Inflation will erase. And creditors will lose. Quietly, gradually, inevitably. And after a decade of this, the global financial system will look completely different. Debt levels will be lower. But so will trust. Currencies will be weaker. But populations will be calmer. And governments, they'll still be in power. Because that's the goal. Not economic perfection. Not fairness. Just survival. Political survival. And here's the thing most people miss. Debt forgiveness isn't the end of the world. It's not collapse. It's not Mad Max. It's just restructuring. It's a reset. A recalibration. The debts go away. The system stabilizes. And life goes on. Just with different winners and losers. The question isn't, will it happen? The question is, which side will you be on? Let me give you one more historical parallel. After World War I, Germany was crushed by reparations debt. It destroyed their economy. Hyperinflation. Political collapse. The rise of extremism. But after World War II, Germany's debt was forgiven, restructured, erased, and within a generation, they became the strongest economy in Europe. Forgiveness didn't destroy them. It saved them. And the same could be true today. For the US. For Europe. For any country drowning in unpayable debt. Forgiveness isn't the end. It's a beginning. A chance to rebuild. To start fresh. To create a system that actually works. But only if it's done right. And that's the gamble. Because here's the risk. If governments forgive too much, too fast, confidence collapses. Inflation spirals. Currencies crash. And the cure becomes worse than the disease. But if they forgive too little, too slow, the debt keeps growing. The burden keeps crushing. And eventually, the system breaks anyway. So they have to thread the needle. Forgive enough to stabilize. But not so much that they trigger chaos. And honestly, I think they can pull it off. Not because they're smart, but because they're desperate. And desperation breeds creativity. So let's bring this full circle. 7 levers. 7 tools. 7 paths converging into one inevitable outcome. Central bank intervention. Printing away the debt. Electoral pressure, voters demanding relief. Legal restructuring, rewriting the rules. Inflation, eroding the burden. International fragmentation, weakening creditors. Populist movements, channeling the rage. Political incentives, choosing survival over orthodoxy. Each one, on its own, is powerful. Together, unstoppable. And the result? Mass debt forgiveness. Not announced. Not celebrated. Just done. Quietly. Gradually. Inevitably. And when it's over, the world will look different. Debtors will breathe easier. Creditors will lick their wounds. Governments will claim victory. And the system, it'll keep running. Because that's what systems do. They adapt. They survive. They evolve. And we'll move on to the next crisis. The next challenge. The next impossible problem. Because that's what we do. We survive. We adapt. We evolve. And maybe, just maybe, we learn something along the way. But here's the final truth. Debt forgiveness isn't about fairness. It's not about justice. It's not about right or wrong. It's about power. And power always wins. The people with power will decide who gets forgiven, who gets left behind, who benefits, who loses. And if you want to survive this transition, you need to understand the game. You need to see the levers. You need to know which side you're on. Because this isn't a spectator sport. This is your future, your wealth, your life. And it's being rewritten right now, while you watch this video. So here's what you do. First, educate yourself. Understand how the system works. Understand the levers. Understand the incentives. Because knowledge is the only defense against being blindsided. Second, protect your wealth. Move out of cash. Move out of bonds. Move into real assets. Things that survive inflation. Things that hold value when paper burns. Third, Stay flexible. Because the rules are changing. What worked before won't work now. What seems safe might not be. And what seems risky might be your best bet. Fourth, watch the signals. When central banks start buying debt aggressively, that's a signal. When politicians start promising forgiveness, that's a signal. When inflation starts creeping up, that's a signal. Don't ignore them. And fifth, prepare mentally. Because this transition, it's going to be chaotic. It's going to be confusing. It's going to feel unfair. But it's happening. And the people who accept that, who adapt, who move with the current instead of against it, they're the ones who'll come out ahead. Debt forgiveness is coming. Not as a conspiracy, not as a theory, but as a policy, a strategy, a solution to an impossible problem. And when it arrives, it won't look like you expect. It won't be dramatic. It won't be announced with fanfare. It'll be quiet, bureaucratic, technical, wrapped in language that obscures what's really happening. But the result will be the same. Trillions of dollars erased, obligations dissolved, burdens lifted, and a new system emerging from the ashes of the old. So the question isn't if. The question is when. And the answer, sooner than you think. Because all 7 levers are already moving. The machine is already running. The outcome is already written. All that's left is for it to play out. And when it does, you'll look back at this video, and you'll realize you saw it coming. You understood the mechanism. You knew the game. And hopefully, you positioned yourself on the winning side. This is the era of debt forgiveness. Not as a revolution, but as an evolution. Not as a collapse, but as a transition. And it's happening right now. So pay attention. Stay sharp. And remember, in a world where the rules are being rewritten, the only way to win is to see the new rules before everyone else does. You just did. Now, what are you going to do about it? If this video opened your eyes, if it showed you something you hadn't considered, then do me a favor. Share it. Because this information, it's not being talked about. It's not being taught. And it's definitely not being covered by mainstream media. So spread it. Help someone else see the levers. Help someone else understand the game. Because the more people who see this coming, the less power it has to blindside us. And subscribe to this channel. Because this is just the beginning. There's so much more to uncover. So many more mechanisms to expose. So many more truths hiding in plain sight. And I'm going to keep pulling back the curtain. One video at a time. So hit that bell. Stay with me on this journey. And let's navigate this transition together. Because the world's changing fast. And the people who understand why are the ones who'll thrive. See you in the next one.